All right, today we're going to do a little time traveling. We're heading back 500 years to unpack a really radical idea. And, the brilliant and pretty controversial mind that came up with it.
So just think about this for a second. What if you lived in a world where you didn't need locks on your doors? At all. A whole society built on such complete trust that the idea of personal security, the way we think about it, just doesn't exist anymore.
And here's the thing. This wasn't just some daydream. The guy behind this actually designed it. He created a whole blueprint for a perfect society. And it was a blueprint that would challenge everything, not just in his world, but in ours too.
Okay, so who was this guy? Well, let's get into it. We're talking about Sir Thomas More. He was an English lawyer, a statesman, and really one of the great thinkers of his time. And he poured this whole vision of a perfect world into his most famous book. It's this small but incredibly powerful book he wrote in Latin, and he called it Utopia.
So what did this place actually look like? What was it like inside his head? Well, More didn't just write it as some fairy tale. No, he presented Utopia as a real place, a whole island society. And we learn about it from a fictional traveler who's been there. It was a really clever way to do it, right? This setup let him explore some pretty revolutionary and, let's be honest, dangerous ideas for 16th century Europe.
Now, what's so fascinating is the way he put this book together. The first part is just this blistering critique of his own world, 16th century England, a place he saw as totally corrupt and unequal. And then, the second part, it presents Utopia as the answer. It's almost like a checklist. You can see it right here. England has inherited power? Nope. Utopia has elected officials. England has all this religious conflict? Well, Utopia has religious tolerance. It was a point-by-point takedown of the society he was living in.
So the utopian system, it was built on some pretty out there ideas for the time. For starters, get this, no private property, no money, everything, and I mean everything, was owned by everyone. All the goods, they were just stored in these public warehouses, and you just took what you needed. And to make sure people didn't get too attached to their stuff, they even switched houses every 10 years. Life wasn't just a grind either. It was all about balancing work with leisure, focusing on things like education, music, and just good conversation.
But here's the really clever part, and it's hidden right in the name itself. More actually made up the word utopia. It's this brilliant little pun from Greek. See, it sounds like utopos, which means good place, but it actually comes from utopos, which means no place. So right from the very beginning, he's telling us that this perfect world is both a good place and, maybe just maybe, a no place, an ideal that we can't actually reach.
But to really get Thomas More, we can't just stop at Utopia. This guy's intellect was just huge. He wrote a ton about history and theology, and it's in those writings that you see a man with these incredibly deep, unshakable beliefs. And it was exactly those beliefs that would eventually put him on a direct collision course with the most powerful man in England.
So right around the same time he's writing Utopia, More also writes The History of Richard III. And this wasn't your typical history book. Oh no. It was this powerful warning about what happens when power goes unchecked. He painted Richard III as this totally ruthless tyrant, and his version of the story was so powerful that it actually became the main source material for, you guessed it, Shakespeare's famous villain.
Then, as the Protestant Reformation starts to sweep across Europe, More uses his writing to fight for his faith. In books like A Dialogue Concerning Heresies, he just passionately defends the Catholic Church. And this is where things get really interesting, right? Because the same guy who dreamed up a world with religious tolerance in his fictional Utopia became this fierce defender of Catholic orthodoxy in the real world. And that conviction, well, it was about to be put to the ultimate test.
And look, More's defense of his faith wasn't just some abstract debate for him. It put him squarely against his own king, Henry VIII, who, well, he was about to break away from the Catholic Church for reasons that were, let's just say, very personal and very political. So you've got this moment where the world of ideas is about to slam right into the world of power.
This timeline here just lays out the whole tragedy perfectly. While More is busy publishing books defending the Pope and church doctrines, King Henry VIII is making his move to become the head of the church in England. So when the moment of truth came, More just couldn't do it. His conscience wouldn't let him accept the king's authority over the Pope. And for that, he was tried for treason, and in 1535, he was executed. But even though his life ended so tragically, More's story, it doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. In fact, his legacy, especially the legacy of that little book, was really just getting started.
Utopia was going to outlive him by centuries and become one of the most influential books ever.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, More's legacy is really two-sided. On the one hand, he gave us the word utopia itself and kicked off centuries of political philosophy and dreaming. But on the other hand, his life became this powerful symbol of integrity. I mean, here was a man who stood by his beliefs, even when it cost him everything. And for that, almost 400 years later, the Catholic Church named him a saint.
And all of this leaves us with the big question, one that More himself hid right inside his work. Is chasing after a perfect utopia a noble dream, something that pushes us to be better? Or is it a dangerous fantasy, an impossible no place that, if we chase it too hard, could lead to its own kind of nightmare? That's the debate he started 500 years ago, and it's one we're still having today.